Okay, I'm back. I'm going to attempt to do this again. I was interrupted. I'm going to use this book. This is just a slipcover, right? Samuel Johnson, Selected Works. The article or the essay I've chosen is Marriage, Men and Women. It's 5 pages long. Um, okay, so a little bit about Samuel Johnson. He's the earliest critic. He's number one on the list. 1709 to 1784, very well known, very sharp mind, very erudite person. And so here's the brief bio: was an English writer, lexicographer, and critic renowned for his substantial contributions to English literature and criticism. His writings reflect a deep engagement with literary tradition, a concern for moral and social issues, and a commitment to high standards of intellectual rigor. Okay, so here's the book. Pretty chunky book, nice hardcover. Um, yeah, so I'm gonna read, and the essay starts with two quotations. And I'll put the quotations here, and I'll just read it from the screen here. Um, so these are my annotations; they're not in the book; they're just my annotations. The first quotation is from Horace. I'll read the Latin, and then the translation by ChatGPT is below, with a slight modification from me, but just like one or two words. Anyway, illic matre carentibus privignis mulier temperat innocens, nec dotata regit virum conjunx, nec nitido fidit adultero. Dos est magna parentium virtus, et metuens alterius tori certo foedere castitas. Okay, so the translation is roughly um, there, an innocent woman cares for her stepchildren who are without a mother, nor does a wife with a dowry rule her husband, nor does she trust a glamorous adulterer. Great is the dowry of a parent's virtue, and chastity, fearing another's bed, is kept by a firm bond. So basically, Horace here is praising the virtues, the chastity, the fidelity, the compassion, some classical virtues of a woman, and what it will mean to marry such a woman, right? Like, well, he doesn't say it, but obviously, like, this is the kind of woman you want to marry. Okay, so next quote is by Francis Petrarch, um, famous Renaissance poet. Okay, Italian. Not there the guiltless stepdame knows the baleful draught for orphans to compose. No wife high portioned rules her spouse, or trusts her essence lover's faithful vows. The lover's there for dowry claim, the father's virtue, and a spotless fame which dares not break the nuptial tie. Okay, again, so the stepdame is just a stepmother. Baleful drought is a drink. Baleful is kind of harmful, something. So it could literally mean just a poison, right? This woman doesn't poison her children, or just she doesn't harm her children. So again, she's compassionate towards even her stepchildren. No wife high portioned. High portioned means she has a large dowry. She's rich. She comes from a rich family, and but even though she's rich or her family's rich, she doesn't lord it or hold it over her husband. And she doesn't trust the smooth talk of her lovers who, yeah, and so and they're faithless vows, right? They're not to be trusted. Anyway, she wants lovers who aspire to who aspire to have the father's virtue, like they want to be admired by the father because they also have the virtues of the father, and and the spotless fame which dares not break the nuptial tie. Again, she's not going to cheat on him. She wants to be known as chaste. That is the spotless fame. Okay, so both Petrarch and Horace are speaking about the virtues of a woman, the kind that you want, the virtues you want them to have if you're going to marry them. Okay, so let's get on with it, and then I'll read, and hopefully I can enunciate a little better than I normally do and not stumble over my words as much as I usually do. Here we go. There is no observation more frequently made by such as employ themselves in surveying the conduct of mankind than that marriage, though the dictate of nature and the institution of providence, is yet very often the cause of misery, and that those who enter into the state can seldom forbear to express their repentance and their envy of those whom either chance or caution has withheld from it. Okay, so a lot of has been written and said about how marriage can make life miserable for you. Okay, continue. This general unhappiness has given occasion to many sage maxims among the serious and smart remarks among the gay. The moralist and the writer of epigrams have equally shown their abilities upon it. Some have lamented, and some have ridiculed it. But as the faculty of writing has been chiefly a masculine endowment, the reproach of making the world miserable has been always thrown upon the women, and the grave and the merry have equally thought themselves at liberty to conclude, either with declamatory complaints or satirical censures, of female folly or fickleness, ambition or cruelty, extravagance or lust. So Johnson here is being very, I don't know, like fair, let's say, and he says, look, reputation has it that women are the problem with marriage. The women make marriage miserable. But he goes, but history has been written by men, and so of course the bigger voice, the more the more common voice is that of men, and of course they're going to blame the women. So he's going to say, hey, I'm going to take a more disinterested position. Okay, next. Led by such a number of examples and incited by my share in the common interest, I sometimes venture to consider this universal grievance, having endeavored to divest my heart of all partiality and place myself as a kind of neutral being between the sexes, whose clamors, being equally vented on both sides with all the vehemence of distress, all the apparent confidence of justice, and all the indignation of injured virtue, seem entitled to equal regard. The men have indeed, by their superiority of writing, been able to collect the evidence of many ages and raise prejudices in their favor by the venerable testimonies of philosophers, historians, and poets. But the pleas of the ladies appeal to passions of more forcible operation than the reverence of antiquity. If they have not so great names on their side, they have stronger arguments. It is to little purpose that Socrates or Euripides are produced against the sighs of softness and tears of beauty. The most frigid and inexorable judge would, at least, stand suspended between equal powers, as Lucan was perplexed in the determination of the cause, where the deities were on one side and Cato on the other. And so this brings us to the reference or the allusions here of Lucan. So Lucan was a poet, and he wrote about, it says here, the civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey. And Lucan kind of like, he doesn't know what Johnson is saying is Lucan doesn't know whose side to take. Like, is Caesar right or was Pompey right? And he's saying, look, the gods favored Caesar because Caesar won. So the gods favored Caesar, but Cato the Younger, who is known for his integrity and moral rigor, so was against Caesar, right? So he's like, given this situation, Lucan himself like was neutral, like he wasn't sure whose side to side on. And so that's just an example of the neutrality. That's it. That's it for the reference. Okay, continue. But I, who have long studied the severest and most abstracted philosophy, have now, in the cool maturity of life, arrived to such command over my passions that I can hear the vociferations of either sex without catching any of the fire from those that utter them. For I have found by long experience that a man will sometimes rage at his wife when in reality his mistress has offended him, and a lady complain of the cruelty of her husband when she has no other enemy than bad cards. I do not suffer myself to be any longer imposed upon by oaths on one side or fits on the other, nor when the husband hastens to the tavern and the lady retires to her closet am I always confident that they are driven by their miseries, since I have sometimes reason to believe that they purpose not so much to soothe their sorrows as to animate their fury. But how little credit soever may be given to particular accusations, the general accumulation of the charge shows, with too much evidence, that married persons are not very often advanced in felicity, and therefore it may be proper to examine at what avenues so many evils have made their way into the world. With this purpose, I have reviewed the lives of my friends, who have been least successful in connubial contracts or marriage contracts, and attentively considered by what motives they were incited to marry, and by what principles they regulated their choice. Okay, so he says, "Look, I'm older now. I'm more impartial. I am not swayed by the pleas or the exhortations of one side or the other. And so I'm in a better position now to make fair judgment." And so he's going to examine his friends and their marriages and see what conclusions he can determine. Okay, next paragraph. One of the first of my acquaintances, one of the first of my acquaintances that resolved to quit the unsettled, thoughtless condition of a bachelor was Prudentius. Obviously, Prudentius meaning he's referring to prudent. He's prudent. He's wise. So he got married. A man of slow parts, right? Not the brightest, not the sharpest, but not without knowledge or judgment in things which he had leisure to consider gradually before he determined them. Whenever we met at a tavern, it was his province to settle the scheme of our entertainment, contract with the cook, and inform us when we had called for wine to the sum originally proposed. In other words, Prudentius kind of set the table, so to speak, for what they were going to talk about on those evenings they hung out together. And then when the wine came, he reminded them, okay, this is the topic. This grave considerer found deep meditation that a man was no loser by marrying early, even though he contented himself with a less fortune. For estimating the exact worth of annuities, he found that, considering the constant diminution of the value of life, with the probable fall of the interest of money, it was not worse to have £10,000 at the age of 22 and 20 years than a much larger fortune at 30. For many opportunities, says he, occur of improving money, which, if a man misses, he may not afterwards recover. I don't know if this is satirical, it's tongue in cheek. So he's saying his friend Prudentius says there's something to be said for getting married early when you haven't made your fortune yet, because it offers you an opportunity while you're married to make your fortune, which I don't know if it's better than having the fortune or just the opportunities to have to make your fortune. So it's almost like, yeah, it's almost like satire. It's almost like he's arguing what like most people would disagree with. Like, what's the big deal about the opportunities to make money rather than already having that money? Anyway, okay, so that's Prudentius. Full of these reflections, he threw his eyes about him, not in the search of beauty or elegance, dignity or understanding, but of a woman with £10,000. Such a woman in a wealthy part of the kingdom, it was not very difficult to find. And by artful management with her father, whose ambition was to make his daughter a gentlewoman, my friend got her, as he boasted to us in confidence 2 days after his marriage, for a settlement of £73 a year less. So he got her cheaper, which means the dowry is coming to him. So she's not coming with as much money as otherwise would have been possible. So, like, again, he's bragging about getting a woman with a smaller dowry than he could have if he had waited. So, which again, it seems like why it's satire here. Like, why would he consider this a good thing? For a settlement of £73 a year less than her fortune might have claimed, and less than he would himself have given if the fools had been but wise enough to delay the bargain. Okay, so who's the real fool? Thus, at once delighted with the superiority of his parts, right, of his thinking, and the augmentation of his fortune, he carried Furia, his wife, Furious, to his house, in which he never afterwards enjoyed 1 hour of happiness. For Furia was a wretch of mean intellects, violent passions, a strong voice, and low education, without any sense of happiness but that which consisted in eating and counting money. Furia was a scold. They agreed in the desire of wealth, but with this difference, that Prudentius was for growing rich by gain, Furia by parsimony. So he was up for like adventures, and she was like saving. So she was kind of more tight with her money, and he was kind of more like risk taker. Um, Furia by parsimony. Prudentius would venture his money with chances very much in his favor, but Furia, very wisely observing that what they had was, while they had it their own, thought all traffic too great a hazard, and was for putting it out at low interest upon good security. Prudentius ventured, however, to insure a ship at a very unreasonable price, but happening to lose his money, was sore was so tormented with the clamors of his wife that he never durst try a second experiment. He has now groveled 47 years under Furia's direction, who never once mentioned him since his bad luck by any other name than the insurer. So she has a nickname for him, the insurer, which is very mocking, very chastising, and yeah, so she never lets him forget that he made this stupid venture, and now they're poor because of his idiocy, and so he is the insurer. That's a brutal. Okay, so yeah, the first example of his friend Prudentius is not very favorable to women, but it's also he put some blame on Prudentius for making this stupid venture. The next that married from our society was Florentius. Florentia means blossoming. He happened to see Zephyretta. A zephyr is like a cool breeze, so that's a reference to her name. In a chariot at a horse race, danced with her at night, was confirmed in his first ardor, waited on her next morning, and declared himself her lover. Very fast. Florentius had not knowledge enough of the world to distinguish between the flutter of coquetry and the sprightliness of wit, or between the smile of allurement and that of cheerfulness. He was soon waked from his rapture by conviction that his pleasure was but a pleasure of a day. Zephyretta had in 24 hours spent her stock of repartee, gone round the circle of her airs, and had nothing remaining for him but childish insipidity, or for herself, but the practice of the same artifices upon new men. So he was charmed by her. She was alluring, but it was just like a very short thing. Like that wore off very quickly. It's like it's her act, but like after a day of it or a week of it, like there's no more to her. So again, he's coming down very harsh on Zephyretta here. Melissus, a man of parts, a man of parts. I think here is always referring to as like a man able to think, right? A man of parts, capable of enjoying and improving life. He had passed through the various scenes of gaiety with that indifference, that possession of himself, natural to men who have something higher and nobler in their prospect. Retiring to spend the summer in a village little frequented, he happened to lodge in the same house with Ianthe, and was unavoidably drawn to some acquaintance with her wit and politeness soon sorry, which her wit and politeness soon invited him to improve. So she was sharp, she had a wit, and she was a polite person, so he was attracted to this. Um, Having no opportunity of any other company, they were always together. And as they owed their pleasure to each other, they began to forget that any pleasure was enjoyed before their meeting. Melissus, Melissus was the king of Crete, right? Right. Okay, so Melissus, from being delighted with her company, quickly began to be uneasy in her absence. And being sufficiently convinced of the force of her understanding, and finding, as he imagined, such a conformity of temper as declared them formed for each other, addressed her as a lover. After no very long courtship, obtained her for his wife, and brought her next winter to town in triumph. Right, so he met her at this place of seclusion and rest, and they spent all their time together, just them, and they got along great. And so he married her. Now began their infelicity. Like once he brings her back, and now life really starts. His unhappiness begins. Melissus had only seen her in one scene, where there was no variety of objects to produce the proper excitements to contrary desires. They had both loved solitude and reflection, where there was nothing but solitude and reflection to be loved. But when they came upon the public life, Ianthe discovered those passions which accident rather than hypocrisy had hitherto concealed. She was indeed not without the power of thinking, but was wholly without the exertion of that power when either gaiety or splendor played on her imagination. She was expensive in her diversions, vehement in her passions, insatiate of pleasure, however dangerous to her reputation, and eager of applause by whomsoever it might be given. This was the wife which Melissus, the philosopher, found in his retirement, and from whom he expected an associate in his studies and an assistant to his virtues. So basically, she was a big flirt and borderline promiscuous, but either way, she was not this polite, witty person only. she might be that in the solitude where they met, but once in public life where their desires and their tastes differed, he found that like yeah, he couldn't really tolerate her. Okay. So what's so funny is that he sets himself up as this arbiter, this disinterested arbiter, this objective arbiter, but he's coming down harsh on the women, which is hilarious. Okay, his next friend, Propacius. I'm sorry, Prosapius. Upon the death of his younger brother, that the family might not be extinct, married his housekeeper, and has ever since been complaining to his friends that mean notions are instilled into his children, that he is ashamed to sit at his own table, and that his house is uneasy to him for want of suitable companions. Yeah, so he married a housekeeper, which is usually a sign that he's married beneath himself, someone of low education, of low morals, maybe. But just the fact that he couldn't have people visit because, yeah, of her like status, not status so much, but just of her behavior, right? Like anyway, so mistake. Another one, Avaro, master of a very large estate, took a woman of bad reputation, recommended to him by a rich uncle, who made that marriage the condition on which he should be his heir. Avaro now wonders to perceive his own fortune, his wife's and his uncle's insufficient to give him that happiness which is to be found only with a woman of virtue. Okay. And now we're going to get to the last line in this last sentence. This is from the last sentence, but this is the last sentence, but it's long. So I quoted the last part. I intend to treat in more papers on this important article of life, and shall therefore make no reflection upon these histories, except that all whom I have mentioned fail to obtain happiness, for want of considering that marriage is the strictest type of perpetual friendship, that there can be no friendship without confidence, and no confidence without integrity, and that he must expect to be wretched who pays to beauty, riches, or politeness that regard which only virtue and piety can claim. That's a nice line, right? If you choose to marry for beauty, or if you choose to marry for riches, or if you just choose because some sweet girl is polite and kind, like you're making a mistake. Not just a mistake, you're going to live a miserable life. Because the honor or like your decision to marry someone should only come based on her virtue, right? And this is a common theme, right? And this is like, yeah. And as we say, for example, when you're in the trenches, you want somebody who is courageous, right? That's the virtue you want. You don't want somebody who's going to cower and run away or just be ineffective. You want somebody who stick his head out and return fire. That's your best chance for survival. And so when the times are tough, that's when your virtue is going to come out. It's like I saw a famous bumper sticker that said, uh, I'm only a bitch when I don't get my way. Right. Yeah, of course. Right. Everybody's kind and sweet. And when you give them everything they want, it's the difficult times that are going to show your character, or at least when your character mostly shows. Right. So that is Samuel Johnson. Um, the hilarious part to me is that he sets himself up as going to be an objective uh, judge here, but he's just really like listing all of his friends and their wives are just terrible people. Um, okay, so that's it. That was Samuel Johnson. I highly recommend this particular book, but anything by Samuel Johnson will do the job. All right, that's number one. Next on the list will be John Ruskin, who is also a pleasure to read. Let me go to this. All right, that's it. If you've read Samuel Johnson, any particular essay, let me know. I read him every once in a while. These are critics, so it's not like a novel. So I kind of like pick and choose, like rainy day stuff. Not that it rains in Southern California. All right, I'm out. Thanks.